In imagination, there is no limitation.
In reality, it is our greatest enemy.
In first part of the video, I will show you some interesting gameplay snippets and highlights from this year, scenes from PvP, PvE and regular gameplay. Then we will come to more classical, more in-depth review.
Game's afoot, huh? War is to want. You do prefer it this way, don't you? As it was meant to be. No peace in our time. Once more unto the dear friend. can see you. Can you see me? To be or not.
Seekers in search of a question. Shapers creating a dream. Explorers who believed a universe was too small.
It is certainly an interesting time for Star Trek fans. On one hand, we have long-awaited new official Star Trek series, which is again a prequel, and looks and tells much darker stories than what one would expect. And on the other hand, we have The Orville by Seth MacFarlane, with much lighter and very Star Trek-ish tone and stories. Then we have movies that are going in completely different direction. There is a popular Star Trek VR game out there, and of course, Star Trek Online. 7 years in the running.
Welcome to Season 14 of Star Trek Online, titled Immersion. What you see is exactly how much I got from new season. Namely, a scant and kilt uniform, along with some upgrades to functionality of demo launcher program. So far, because of some bug, I cannot play new featured episode, enter new fleet holding, or play new PvE missions. Half of my tunes are stuck on places they were before season patch. Can't even log in with those tunes when I tried game crashes to desktop. Needless to say, my bug reports fell on deaf ears, along with similar reports from many others. Developer support concerning some major game-breaking bugs can sometimes be abysmal. So I play Star Trek Online like I'm directing a silent movie. These days, when Star Trek franchise is going places no Star Trek has gone before, we might add silent Star Trek MMO game to that variety. In my last Star Trek Online video, which was almost a year ago, some people said that the way I made it makes it look and feel way better than it actually feels like. In course of this video you will see some montages that may not directly reflect the individual in-game experience, but rather things you can see if you look for them or make them. And it has its purpose. The major thing that bothered me over the years was how clunky and half-assed some parts of the game look and feel like, and on the contrast, how much potential it could have with just a bit more care and effort. Namely, this is the case of developer effort going into places to make more and more things to sell, instead of making quality items, ships, maps and missions. For example, how many unnecessary weapons variations there are in-game. How many similar ships, with half-assed or generic interior. How many planets you can't visit, how many missions with silent repeating of scan, shoot, mechanics, without any challenge, feeling or suspense, how many empty PvE queues, how long since the scoreboard in PvP is not fixed. They have, sort of, started going the right way with Lucari's story arc, in episodes Echoes of Light, Survivor, Brushfire, Mirrors and Smoke, or those in episodes had hint at what can be achieved with 5% more effort and idea, and then they just dropped it all off with Beyond the Nexus, which is another super generic episode, and with shoehorning of Tsinkethi across entire arc. It's a shame, really. In this review, I will try to cover stuff I find important in this game. I cannot possibly cover every aspect of it. This game is in peculiar state, experience, and enjoyment is completely individual and subjective at this point. Especially if you are relatively new to Star Trek Online. But there are some facts that still may give some objectivity here. According to Steam charts, average number of players after new season update is around 1,800 players, with peak at around 2,400 players. Those are more or less standard numbers for Star Trek Online, with few larger peaks on Steam over the years, namely when Legacy of Romulus and Delta Rising were released. When Legacy of Romulus was released, peak player number on Steam was over 7,000. Fun fact is that back then, peak number of players logged into the PvP channel was around 2,000. Now, peak number is around 50, with maybe 30 playing.
As for me, things have started to feel a little episodic. The farther out we go, the more I find myself wondering. What it is we're trying to accomplish. If the universe is truly endless, not strives for something forever average.
It isn't uncommon, you know. It's easier than you think to get lost in the vastness of space, even for a captain. There's only yourself, your ship, your crew.
Chapter 6.
Wind blowed it out on the road, out of the mode I go with my growing money. Stains on my face from the race. It's the fun that we had on the way.
Chapter 5.
Your problem is you spent your whole life thinking there are rules. There aren't. We used to be gorillas. All we had is what we could take and spend.
There is no such thing as the unknown.
temporarily hidden.
So, here it is, probably the first review of a game after 5.5 years of playing, and 7 years after its release. But, let's start from the beginning. As a huge Star Trek fan, the first time I started playing, I was blown away by sheer possibility and potential a modern Star Trek MMO game could have. Potential to visit some iconic planets depicted in its universe. Vulcan, Andoria, Major, Cardassia, Konos, to explore those planet secrets, architecture, society, people. As it turned out, only a handful of those major planets you could actually visit, and what you would get are very small empty places devoid of any feeling, quests, mystery, or even its people. We got some of that before exploration was deleted from the game. It was a bunch of randomly generated planets with fetch and scan or shoot and scan missions, but the game wasn't poor with them. At the very least, you could wander off into the stars and find something to do. I was super excited while I was leveling up my first character when I got promoted and got to choose between Intrepid, Galaxy, or Defiant class starship. It was a seemingly impossible choice at the time. I wanted to try them all. I was looking at the stats of all 3 ships for what seemed like hours, while thinking what would be a better choice. It turned out that choice was entirely inconsequential. I chose the Defiant and was immediately disappointed to the point of quitting the game. Defiant was merely an empty hull of its depiction in the series. The story. After the first fully subjective feeling of excitement and first few episodes to explore strange new worlds, or fight glorious battles or solve mysteries, I quickly realized that developers chose to replace "it's not the destination, it's the journey what matters" to complete opposite. Every next episode seemed just like a means to get new gear, and only thing that hooks you into playing more is the possibility to get more, better, faster gear and better rewards. Classical RPG progression mechanics, with one crucial exception. There is no end game and the story is all over the place. First thing that was jarringly wrong and extremely limiting to me, and a very bad choice overall, was classification of starships, or tying them to classes of captains. Same ship somehow loses some essential technical possibilities when you change captain class. And while I understand that Cryptic tried to emulate ship's behavior, if a science officer is in captain's seat instead of a trained tactical officer, that whole mechanic is executed poorly. While game mechanics seemingly got more complicated over the years, they have stayed the same. You got shields, hull, weapons, and engines, or its ground combat equivalent. Everything is about those 4 stats. Every skill you choose, every console, specialization, class, ability, trait, or weapon is used only to boost those stats. It seems way more complicated than that, with various resists, dots, procs, etc., but in its core, you defeat an enemy when your weapons or abilities drop or pierce enemies' shields and bring its hull to 0. 95% of that is done before you even engage the enemy. In combat, you just play your setup out. Only thing that makes a difference in combat is timing of activation of skills, and to a minor degree flying, or 2D positioning. Flying and targeting is my major gripe here. You can't target and destroy critical parts of the ship. Flying is in 2D space with no benefits of Z-axis positioning, and the ship model could basically be any 2D shape with 4 sides. You get your front and aft weapons and abilities with its firing arcs, and that's it. Cryptic could have done so much more here with targeting and positioning even in this 2.5D engine. It would be that much more challenging and engaging to play. Each new ship would be a new challenge to master. Besides the obvious wrong decision and limitation to standardized weapon placement and numbers on various different starships, other big bad choice was to stray away from logic as far as possible. Namely, every ship should have had dedicated torpedo slots in front, sides, and aft. Every ship should have had its dedicated special unswitchable weapon that would be stronger than anything you put in weapon slots. They have tried to do that with special consoles, and on some ships with frontal locked slot. Problem is that none of those special weapons was stronger in combat than what you could otherwise put on the ship. Defiance quad cannons or various lances are easiest examples. Player versus environment. When I started playing, you could get board space and ground gear by playing 6 missions. Depending on the difficulty, you would get Mark 10, 11, or 12 quality. And it was not certain you would get them. Missions were hard to play in random groups back then. Failure was easy. Team needed to know what and when they are to do something. With the introduction of reputation system, they have removed the challenge and introduced grinding without challenge. Basically, developers have introduced secured and instant gratification. By doing that, they have made those missions in the game boring. No failures, no challenges, just pure RPG grinding. What little challenge there was in Phobos no-win scenario mission, they have removed, even that because it was too hard for all players to win. What happened next was logical and natural. Players formed private channels and set challenge goals for themselves in the form of DPS race. Developers played along, and every new paid ship, lockbox, or gear was aimed to fuel the DPS race. Channels that were formed as a means to train and master hard missions were transformed to DPS leagues. And then, earlier this year, developers made huge change in balancing that drove even those core players away. You cannot remove the challenge, reward, failure system from the game. It is what makes the game worth playing. A sore spot for dedicated PvP players, PvE players and developers alike. Over the years it transformed from relatively large and active player base to basically a handful of diehards still wanting to give it a shot in hope of some change that never came. Only part of the game that had constant challenge for various players has become less and less skill and more exploiting the gear and trades made for PvE against the NPC enemies with huge health and shield stats. PvP community couldn't keep up with grinding needed to have or test new gear. New players were so overwhelmed with every shit thrown at them in few seconds, so it was a definite end of PvP. I imagine for most players, first social contact in-game was through fleet system. Building fleet starbase with in-game friends was a challenge when I started. It took many expensive and rare resources, joined missions, and it was fun. Now, new fleet expansions are down to filling commonly obtained items and currency. No fleet teamwork or communication is needed. They will try to change that in new season, but I will reserve any judgment on that when I see it.
4, 3, 2...
It is ungrateful these days to try and qualify something as art, or to quantify and define the art itself. It is a broader and broader term. The more people produce art, and it has always been subject to either elite or popular recognition. It is even more ungrateful to talk about art when you talk about video games. But these days, when video games are recognized art form, I must at least touch on the subject. In terms of video games, art consists of visuals, sound, story, map ingenuity and general atmosphere, which consists of quality of gameplay, game systems, user interface and general developer video game craftsmanship. So, how does Star Trek Online fare in those departments? In one word, it is inconsistent. At best. In more words, visuals are mostly all over the place with few bright spots, great setups, and much more average or below average looking maps and assets. See New Romulus for example. Graphics and design there are best that STO can offer. Same can be said about episodes Midnight, Temporal Front, Survivor, Mirrors and Smoke, Echoes of Light and Brushfire. Things go downhill further you go through earlier episodes. Maps seem too small or too vast with repeating assets. Most maps seem unfinished, restrictive, and small. Starfleet Academy is the biggest offender here by far. But, at least visuals and design are improving as time goes by. Same can't be said about visuals in combat, which is, simply put, a chaotic clusterfuck with overly intrusive and overused effects that mostly even cover entire screen. Combined with heavy UI, it is very visually busy and hardware taxing. In places where graphics shined, art design shines as well, but assets suffer because of engine limitations and low effort. Sometimes art design and story decisions go completely off rails. Prime example of that are Voth Battle Zone and Tsinkati. I only can politely call Tsinkati design wrong. Mixing them in Lucari story arc is almost the same mistake. Lucari story arc could have been so much more. Following them into first steps into unknown space, what Star Trek Online should have been from the very start. I had so much hope after Lucari introduction, and it just went wrong with awful inclusion of Tsinkati and their disastrous battle zone. Latest episode, Beyond the Nexus, also doesn't inspire hope for the future episodes. I played much better Foundry missions. Sound is, on the other hand, at least consistent and unintrusive. Sound effects and ambient sound are very good. I don't care much about playing with music on because of repeating, but music is good. What I always hated the most in STO though, are extremely low-effort cutscenes with glitches, camera skips and missing or unsynced sound. Just awful. Also your own characters missing the voice, even a customizable synthetic one is so immersion breaking, and it could have been done. Animations are just wooden, simple and very few and very low effort. User interface is okay after you get used to it, and the ability to remove it all, or parts of it is very good. Best marks by far, get the possibility to record and play demo files everywhere, and the ability to create your own, and play Foundry missions from others. These two things are greatest, what Star Trek Online can offer, but also suffer from low choice of assets, lack of animations, cutscenes and voiceovers. Overall, if Cryptic did put just 5% effort in these things I mentioned, of what they did in promotion and creation of lockboxes, reputation systems and some other systems to drive the game economy, Star Trek Online would be much different game. The verdict. I could go for hours on this and that, and I have skipped covering many aspects of the game because of time limitations. But my enjoyment of the game has been ranging from sheer excitement in certain moments to quitting rage in others. It is all subjective in the end. One thing is for certain, if you are not a Star Trek fan, your tolerance threshold might be different than mine, and if you are a die-hard Star Trek fan, you might find some things ranging from frustrating to infuriating. It is all subjective except wasted potential. It hurts the most here even with often mentioned engine limitations. There are some good story missions, some good PvE missions, well all had some great moments, highlights, but the magic is over as soon as you realize that whatever you do is aimed at getting new gear to pump some stat to defeat an enemy that has more HP. core gameplay is never addressed by developers. They just keep adding new layers of effects on top of very simply designed game systems. It is a shame that developers skipped few steps while trying to earn a quick buck with new paid ships, costumes and gear, that they have forgot how important is the game factor in a video game. It feels like Star Trek Online was more of a storefront to sell Star Trek-themed virtual merchandise for them than anything else. And they have really crammed everything Star Trek related in the game, and created paradoxical situations, where ships and weapons in new lock boxes are always more powerful, regardless of canon, time period or in-game logic.
out of all Tier 6. We have struck a granitic mine. We have lost all power. Our hull is penetrated and we have sustained many
survive the onslaught.
Chapter versus DPS under fire.
I've seen things few people wouldn't believe. Attack ships on fire or shimmering light. I watched scenes glittering down in tears of game. All those moments will be lost in time, like tears.
After time, you may find that having is not so pleasing a thing after all as wanting. It is not logical, but it is often true.
next episode.